Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the new modern authentication mechanisms for Office 365 and G Suite email in CSM 10.1. I'm actually going to show first the Office 365 configuration, and then I'll show the G Suite configuration. So if you only care about the G Suite configuration, I'll put a timestamp at the bottom of the screen here. You can skip ahead and see that part of it. But if you're interested in the Office 365 part, stay here and enjoy the show. All right, so I'm in the admin tool, and I'm going to go to email and event monitoring. And you'll notice this new edit email credentials. We could go in there to set up our email credentials for both G Suite and for the Outlook Office 365 Modern Auth. But it actually makes a little bit more sense if we go through the standard edit email accounts and settings. And you can see I've actually created a couple accounts already. This is actually the second time I've tried to record this video. So we'll go ahead and click Add, and we're going to do Office 365, so we'll choose Exchange Account. And now we'll give this a name, let's say Demo Exchange. You'll notice this new checkbox here, and this is what we use to do the modern authentication. So I'm going to click that checkbox. You'll notice all of this goes away because this credential-based authentication, or the modern authentication for Exchange, is only an Office 365 thing. So Cherwell can automatically guess the Exchange domain, the server, and all that stuff. It figures that out based on the other stuff that we'll provide. So here, I'm going to put in an email address for, I actually have another company that uses Office 365, so I'm going to use an email address from that company. And the email address is what I'll type into the user field here. Now you'll notice the password is grayed out. That's because we're going to use Office 365 Modern Authentication, not the username and password. So I'll click Credentials, and you can see I've already created a couple credentials, but let's go ahead and create a new one so that you can see exactly what's involved here. We'll say Demo O365 creds. Hopefully that's not what that is what I named it before. Demo Exchange creds. We'll choose Office 365 Modern Authentication. The other choice is Google Authentication, but we're using Office 365, so we'll choose this option. We'll move over to this tab. Notice it has a little Exchange logo. We need 3 pieces of information: a client ID, a tenant ID, and a secret. We could also use a certificate, but there's a little bit more complexity involved in that. And if you're interested in that, leave a comment below and I'll do a video on that. But for now, I'm just going to do the simple version and use a secret. This is still secure. This is still more secure than using username and password. You don't lose any security by using a secret as opposed to a certificate. It's just a slightly different form of the thing that's used for authentication. So where do you get this information? You get this information from your Office 365 admin console, and specifically Azure Active Directory. So whether you're in a full-fledged Azure account or you just have the simple little Microsoft 365 account like my other company does, you can see one user, super small, same sort of configuration. So I'm going to click Show All, and then go to the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. This pulls up the full Azure Active Directory console. So I'll actually click Azure Active Directory, and then I'll go down to this link here called App Registrations. And you can see I've already done this a couple times, but let's create a new registration. And we'll call it Cherwell Demo. Who can use this application or access this API? Accounts in this organizational directory only. That's what we want. You can ignore this part down here and then click register. So now that we have an application, also known as a client, we have a client ID and a tenant ID. So let's first copy the client ID, paste that into Cherwell. Then let's go back, grab the tenant ID, paste that in as well. Now, I mentioned this secret, so where do we get that? If we go back to the application configuration in Azure Active Directory, we can go down to certificates and secrets. This is actually where we'd manage both. If we wanted to use a certificate, we'd do that here as well, but I'll click New Client Secret. You can set an expiration, but remember that when this secret expires, your access to Azure Active Directory, or Exchange rather, expires as well. So you would need to update that, every year or every 2 years. I'm going to choose never. We'll give it a name called client key. Add. Now, before you do anything else, make sure to click this copy to clipboard button, because this is the only time you'll ever be able to see this value. So I've clicked copy to clipboard. I'm going to go over to Cherwell and copy it into the secret field. At this point, we have enough information. We can verify that the client has been set up correctly and click this test button. And we get success. Now what this means is that we've done all the configuration to get the, basically instead of a password configured. What we haven't done is actually given this credential access to email. So I'll save this because we're done with this screen, and I'll click OK. And now credentials are set there. That's good. But if I were to hit this test account button, it would actually not work because we haven't given these credentials access to email. So let's go back to Azure Active Directory. We're done with this screen. We'll go down to API permissions. We'll click Add a Permission. We'll scroll down to Exchange, because this is the API that we're using. Go to Application Permissions and choose Full Access as App. There may actually be a more scoped set of permissions, but I haven't actually been able to confirm what those are. Full Access as App works. It probably gives access to a little bit more than is really needed. But as long as you keep that key secret, you should be good. So I'll click Add Permissions. And then the last thing we need to do is click this Grant Admin Consent for Shutterpilot LLC, or Grant Admin Consent for your directory in your case. So I'm going to click that button, click Yes. And now what that does is it enables other users within the directory to use this app to access the permissions that we gave it. So in this case, Exchange. So what that means is that when we go back into Cherwell, we'll actually be able to click this test account button and everything will work. However, we have one more thing that we need to do, and then we actually need to wait because of the way that Azure Active Directory works. There's a little bit of a delay. It might show up in the admin console, but it hasn't actually propagated through the rest of the system. So first, I'll add a from email address, and I'll make it the same as the account that we created. And now if I click test account, well, it'll actually work. In past times when I've done this, it actually didn't work on the first try because those settings hadn't propagated throughout the rest of the system. In this case it did, so I guess we waited enough time. If it doesn't work for you, you'll get an error message like 401 access denied or unauthorized or something like that, just give it 5 or 10 minutes and try again. If it still doesn't work, maybe give it half an hour. If it doesn't work after that, go through the rest of the settings and make sure you have everything set up correctly. But don't freak out if it doesn't work the first time you hit test account. So close, hit OK, and we'll hit OK there to save. Okay, so now let's set up a Gmail account. So for a Gmail account, we'll create an IMAP account. And one note on this is that you do actually have to enable IMAP in G Suite. I don't think it's enabled by default. It might be now, but there was a long time when it wasn't. So make sure you enable IMAP. I'll leave a link to a document describing that in the description below. So let's create this account. Let's call it my Google account. And just like with the Exchange account, we'll click Use Credential-Based Authentication. We do need to specify some information here. We'll do imap.gmail.com because that's what is right for G Suite. For security, we'll do SSL because that's what it's expecting. For username, just like with the Exchange account, we're going to use the email address that we want to use. So in this case, I'm just using my email address. And similarly, we'll click Credentials. And you can see I've done this a couple times already. Let's add a new credential. Demo Google. Let's choose Google Authentication here, and you'll notice this tab changes to a little Google G. We need two pieces of information here: service account email and private key. To get those, we need to go over to the Google API. What is this? Google API console, I think is what it's called. So the first time you log in here, you might not have a project set up. It'll prompt you to create a project, which is basically just a name. You can see I've already created a project. I called mine API project. The next thing you'll need to do is go over to the library and make sure that the Gmail API is enabled. So just search for Gmail here, click Gmail API. I don't believe it's enabled by default, but if it is already enabled, you'll see this green check mark and it'll say API enabled. If not, you'll get an enable button. Click that enable button and then you'll see the green check mark. So now let's go back to APIs and services and credentials. So now that it's loaded, I can click this button and create a new service account. We'll give it a name. Let's say Demo Cherwell, or let's do Cherwell Demo. This sounds a bit better. Cherwell Demo. You can give it a description for sending email. Click Create, and just click through those next two screens, and you'll see a new service account show up in this last section here. Cherwell Demo. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually add some credentials to this. So let's edit this. We'll add a key, create new key, and download it as a JSON. So this is actually a text-based format. So we'll click Create, and it'll download a file, which you'll want to open up in a text editor. On my machine, it's already configured to open up in Visual Studio Code. But if you don't have Visual Studio Code, you'll want to open this up in something like Notepad or Notepad++, or some program that you're familiar with to edit text documents. We're looking for these two things right here: client email and private key. So client email, we'll just go ahead and copy that. And that will go in this service account email field here. Now next, we need that private key, which this is a very long line of text. So what I'd recommend doing is placing your cursor right after that open double quote right there. And then shift and end, and while holding the shift key down, hit the left arrow twice so that the cursor is just inside the ending double quotes. That means the entire contents of that field is selected. I'll hit Control-C to copy, then go back to Cherwell, and Control-V to paste. At this point, we can hit the Test button. We get success, but just like with the Exchange Modern Auth, this doesn't mean we're done with the configuring the credentials. We haven't actually given this credential access to Gmail. So I'll hit OK. I'll choose OK. We're basically done with this screen, but let's actually configure the permissions before we go any further. I'll close that. First, we need to show domain-wide delegation and enable G Suite domain-wide delegation. Click the Save button, and then we can actually enable this credential to be used to access Gmail. For that, we have to go into your G Suite admin console. Once you're at your G Suite admin console, go to Security, scroll all the way down to the bottom to App Access Control. In some versions, this might say API Control, I believe. And then at the bottom, you'll see Domain-Wide Delegation with a link to Manage Domain-Wide Delegation. Add a new client. We need two pieces of data here, the client ID and an OAuth scope. The client ID is back on your credentials page. It's under this OAuth 2 client IDs heading. You'll see client for Cherwell Demo. Cherwell Demo is what we named the service account down here. So we'll go to the far side of that row under the client ID column and click this Copy to Clipboard button. Then we'll paste. I'm just hitting Control-V. We'll paste that client ID into that field. And then for OAuth scopes, we need the one that corresponds to Gmail, or specifically G Suite's mail. So that's https mail.google.com. https mail.google.com. Then click Authorize. Everything looks good. It shows up. And now, let me check my notes. Yeah, we should be done with the Google API console and admin console. Let's go back to Cherwell, configure our outgoing server, which is going to be smtp.gmail.com. Security is also going to be SSL, and the port 465 is correct. This does require authentication, and we should use the same settings as the incoming server. And just like with the Exchange server, we'll want to configure our from settings. So I'll add my email address here. Click OK. And now we're ready to test everything. So let's first test the incoming server. A quick way to test this and test that everything's configured correctly is just to expand this mailbox dropdown. It'll take a few seconds, but then it should list all of your mailboxes on whatever account you're logging in as. It does, so we're good there. Inbox is what I'd want to view if I were using this for, say, email and event monitor. I'm not going to, so I'm just going to ignore that. But now we can test the whole round trip, that it sends an email and then it can read an email. So I'll click this Test Account button. It's sending the email. It sent the email. Now it's trying to read the email, and it successfully read the email. So now our Google Authentication G Suite account is all set up. We can click OK, and then we can click OK there, and now we're done. We have an Exchange account and a Google account both configured using their respective modern authentication mechanisms, and then we can use them for email and event monitor or just to send emails from our Cherwell instance. If you liked this video and found it informative, please give it a thumbs up. Please hit that like button down below. And also, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of videos like this, and especially with 10.1 recently released, I'll be doing a lot of videos specifically about features that are new to 10.1. So you don't want to miss out on those. Hit that subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you can get notified when those videos are released. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment below. If you have any ideas of videos I can do in the future, leave a comment about them. I'll read all the comments, and I'll definitely respond to them if you ask a question. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great week.